Very good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. I got up at 4 o'clock working on my class for Merced, so I'm a little tired now. I gotta nip this stuff in the butt when it bugs me. I have to like copy paste, all kind of weird shit. And so hopefully my class is going to be certified for the state. So that's the goal with that. But so we're tired. How about everybody else?
Excited. This is last week.
Yay! Last Zoom.
Finally.
I know. What a class, right? Very fast. It all went here. Well, do you guys have any questions on top of your mind, or you want to just get into the material?
Quick one about the test. It says that, let me see, there are 65 questions. The first 25 questions cover the material from the review sheets. The second part, 26 to 65, cover anatomy terms and reflects on the term list. So that means that the first 25 questions are going to be not multiple choice question about how does the white blood cells react to whatever, and then the first 26 to 65 is going to be same as the muscle and bone test, which is going to be naming an anatomical part from pictures of models. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, you just summarized what my first part is over here. Perfect. So if you can see my screen, yes, that is absolutely correct. So the first 25 questions come from the test review material. That's this one here, where the 4 sheets where everything is basically bullet pointed out that we went through since the muscle and bone test. Since it's quite a bit of material, I consolidated all the stuff I want you to know for the test on these sheets, which, you know, it's an open book test. So you just print that stuff out, and as long as you understand it, you're going to be okay with that. And then the other questions are from the term list, which is over here, which is all the labeling and coloring exercises we've done since the muscle bone stuff, beginning with the heart. They're all grouped together, and so it should be okay. The good thing about this test is, which you're gonna like, it's also multiple choice and not fill in the blank, this part.
Oh, wow.
That's gonna make it much easier for many of you, and for some of you it's gonna make it okay to be able to survive it, because
So no
there's a wide range of you know, student capabilities I have, depending if, you know, I have high school students in this class too. You go ahead.
So no pictures, right? Like the last
Yes.
exam?
Yes, pictures.
Yes, pictures. Yeah, let me just yeah, it's the same setup. It's a combination between test 1 and test 2, essentially.
So what we're gonna have a picture, and instead of having a blank little box where you type the name, you're gonna have to choose between 4 names. Well, I mean, whatever. How many?
Yes, correct. You have to just choose the right answer. That way, it's, you know, it's basically, then it's instantly graded, and you also have the grade that it's going to be right there, you know, afterwards, because since it's multiple choice, I don't have to go behind and look at it.
When is the test open?
I can open it now if you want.
I think it says the 16.
Yeah, but I can open it.
I mean, I'll probably be ready by Wednesday. I don't know what Wednesday is.
Yeah, no, I'll just open it after we finish here today, because it really, if you've done all the stuff, there's no reason why we should wait for it, and then you can just enjoy the rest of your summer a little bit. On the review tab, test review tab, the other thing we have, like in the second test, I have review videos that go through all the terms, which, you know, for some of you, that's helpful to look at it a couple times. Again, there's a lot of video material. You don't have to review everything. A lot of it is repetition, but it's here to, you know, some people have a hard time with the quizzes or the questions, for example, then you just can watch the video and it explains it like I explained it in class. And so that makes more sense for some than just checking the answers and doing it over and over. And then also, like in the second test, I also have pictures of models that just show you the models that I use on the test. Again, if that's helpful, then use it. So you familiarize yourself with what I'm using as models. I don't think you should print that out. That uses a lot of ink for just a few pictures. But it's here for you guys to use and to learn from. That's under this tab.
For anyone that struggles with some of I don't know. For me, the one thing that I struggle most is when I don't understand one concept is we can't really ask to reformulate. And when you have different videos, so in most class, there's like the booklet videos and the lecture that covers the same topic.
Mhm.
You don't say it the same way, so it helps hearing something in two different ways, I guess. I don't know how to say
No,
it.
and
Like a
I think that,
reformulation, rephrasing. It
yeah,
helps me a
yeah,
lot.
and I think that's partly the reason why I don't hesitate putting all the material up that I created or over the years got made, including, it took me a while to post the videos with that's off the questions, because I'm like, well, then you can just cheat. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because if you watch that, you watch another hour of something, or you screen forward, and it gives you hopefully more input that makes you understand it. As you say, it's explained in different ways, or a student asks a question, and then I have to go through it again. And if something still is not making sense, reach out to me. I'm always here on text. And also in the Padlet, although this week I haven't gone through the Padlets yet. I'll do that after the class is over. Good. Does that make sense so far?
Makes sense to me.
All right. Well, this week, we will go through week 5. And this is the last Zoom we're going to have. Next Monday, we don't have to have a Zoom, because we're essentially just taking the test or finishing up what we covered today. And so I'm not going to hold a Zoom, since we've gone through the test a few times. And you guys can just review the videos from Zoom if you need to review them, or you can ask me a question on the text. So today we're going to do respiratory system, we're going to do digestive nutrition, urinary, and then reproembryology, which is basically what we're having left. These are pretty straightforward topics. I think the harder stuff, the brain and so forth, is kind of finished. Now, when we look at the respiratory system, we talk about the different anatomy terms, the basically the respiratory system is here for us to get oxygen into the bloodstream, which we need to make ATP, and then also get rid of carbon dioxide, as well as other waste products that we can exhale that are gas-based, basically. And so we're really looking at 2 parts. We're looking at the passageways that bring the air into the lungs, and then we are looking then in the lungs into the alveoli structures that have the gas exchange happening between the external air and the bloodstream, and we call that external respiration. When the oxygen goes from the bloodstream into the cell, we call that internal respiration. What's interesting about the respiratory system is when we breathe, we really expand the chest, the rib cage, the chest, and also decrease the diaphragm. That's really the biggest component of breathing. So we're increasing the volume of the lung cavity, and the lungs themselves are not active, they're passive, but they're attached to the walls of the ribs or the chest cavity, as well as the diaphragm. And so that's described in the serous membrane system, where you have a suction created with the serous membrane. The serous membrane it seems like it is 2 layers, but the layers are connected. So it's just the 1 layer or 1 membrane that creates 2 layers. And what we can do inside of there, we can have a fluid, that's the serous fluid, and we can through that then have a lower pressure inside that membrane, and that suctions the lung to the rib cage. And then whatever we do with the rib cage and the diaphragm, also that increase the volume or decrease the volume, that has an effect of either inhalation or exhalation. And so that's kind of really cool with the serous membrane. Gas exchange is really the red blood cells carries the oxygen. What's interesting there is the carbon dioxide is not mostly carried by the red blood cells. It's mostly diffused in plasma, which is often plasma, and that's how that gets transported. So that's what's interesting about that. And it also has a component then to do with the pH. The higher the carbon dioxide content, the lower the pH. So the more acidic the blood gets, and that can become a problem if it's out of bound. We have a little bit of carbon monoxide, the poisoning, because carbon monoxide is like oxygen attaching really strongly to the hemoglobin, and so stronger than oxygen, and so therefore carbon monoxide takes the place where the oxygen attaches to, and therefore we cannot transport enough oxygen through the system, and that's why it creates a poison, and we get hypoxic state.
Is the difference in pH from that the CO2 creates causes cramps? Is this the reason why?
You know, that's interesting. I don't know that. I gotta look that up. The cramps. I also know it causes. I probably.
That would make sense.
Because acidity, an increase in acidity causes definitely cramping and more sore muscles. And so I would think that also has a component with it. Yeah, it does make sense. And then the last thing here, we talk about the breathing mechanisms or the control of breathing. And we both need to have how often do we breathe and how deep do we breathe? Those are basically things that we need to control with the brainstem nuclei that have it in there. So that's the two things that we want to control with breathing from the nervous system's perspective. The lungs do not breathe by themselves. It's not like the heart. So we have to do that with the nervous system, through the brain. All right, that's good enough for the respiratory system. And then when we go to the digestive system, we want to, have a tube that is from the mouth to the anus. And that's all inside that tube. We are basically in the outside environment. So that's why when an appendix bursts, it's really problematic, because we bring toxic stuff or outside world stuff into the sort of hermetically sealed environment that is sterile and is not used to these bacteria and so forth. And so when somebody has a burst appendix, we got to be very fast acting, that the inside doesn't get too poisonous, and then everything dies off and the person dies. Unfortunately, it's a very problematic thing. So if you have somebody who's suspected to have an appendicitis, don't be hesitant to call the doctor's office. There's actually one interesting thing you can take. It's called the McMurray's point, and you learn that in physical exam if you do nursing. Most likely, it's a point between the belly button and the ASIS, the front of the hip bone right here. It's in between. And what you do is when you suspect somebody has a stomach ache and it might be appendicitis because it's sharp and very painful, you press into that point slowly, not to create more pain with that, but then you let it go really fast. And if the really fast letting go of that point causes sharp pain, then you just grab them and go to the hospital and have them checked out if there is appendicitis there. So that's called a McMurray's point. I always bring that up because I think it's an easy test and it can be very useful. So what we do here is we just basically talk about the different tubes, the different parts of the gut tube. We start with the mouth. The pharynx is an area behind the mouth down to the larynx where the air separates from the food water. And the trachea becomes the air tube, and the esophagus then becomes the gullet, which is the gut tube. And from there, and then we have a little brief discussion about peristalsis. How do we get food move forward? And what happens in the let's see, do I have in the small intestine? No, we don't have that. We have it in the booklet. When we look at the gut tube, we have two layers of muscles. It's a three-layer system. We have two layers of muscle. We have a longitudinal layer and a circular layer. And combining both of those, contracting the circular layer and then contracting the longitudinal layer, that is how we get the food moving forward through the gut tube. And you can sort of visualize a worm moving forward when you see it on the floor or on the ground. It kind of has that same mechanism, the way it can ambulate. That's peristalsis. Then we get into the stomach. So from the mouth down to the stomach, mostly what we have is a tube that brings that food down to an area where we can really start digestion. And digestion is the breakdown of food into smaller particles. We could do that both with chemicals by squirting enzymes onto the food, and also by peristalsis and what they call segmentation, by massaging the food with those muscles and breaking down the particles more that way. The beginning of chemical digestion starts actually in the mouth, where we have this enzyme called amylase that digests carbohydrate. And so that's why your mother said, swallow your food 20 times before, no, chew it 20 times before you swallow it, because you're actually mixing the food that you're chewing with the amylase, starts the digestion process, and is very helpful. So there is a reason for that. So don't eat your food in the car, on the go, and just swallow it whole if you don't have to, because it's not that great in terms of digestion. If you get indigestion, it's your own fault, basically. Enjoy the food like the Europeans do. I'm sorry. But you know what I'm saying. Play the Italian card on that and sit back. When we get to the stomach, in the stomach, we have basically a bag-shaped organ that actually has 3 layers of muscle, also a circular, an oblique layer, sorry, there, and it massages the food heavily, but it also starts digesting protein. And so we start digesting protein there, and we denature the food. We have the gastric juice there is about the pH of 1.5 to 2, which is very, very acidic. We have hydrochloric acid inside the stomach, which if you put that on the skin, it will kill the skin and burn a hole through it. So we don't want to do that. And then from there, we get into the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine is the duodenum, and that's an area where the pancreas comes in. Right, here's the pancreas. And that is a place where we have a lot of chemicals be squirted into the digestive tract, into the duodenum. And those, of course, chemically digest all the different food groups, the macro and the micro molecules, and set them free, that then we can absorb them. And the absorption process of food happens mostly in the jejunum, which is this first portion of all this wiggly stuff. And that's where we get the food particles coming into the bloodstream. Or as it turns into fat, the fat goes actually first through the heart, and no, it goes through the bloodstream as well. What happens with most of food, it goes right from the stomach, from the gut area to the liver. And the liver processes the food, and then it goes through the systemic circuit. The fat stuff doesn't go to the liver directly. It first goes through the systemic blood system, and then it gets brought to the liver for digestion.
Professor.
Yes.
What part of the stomach growls when the stomach growls?
It's the stomach.
Ah, so it's the muscle movement that makes those weird noises?
Yeah, and you also get the acidity gets secreted when you're hungry. It starts to be secreted, and that's sort of irritating a little bit. And so that's where we start the stomach growling coming in.
Cool.
After the jejunum, we get to the ileum, and the ileum is where we absorb less and less food particles, but more and more water. And that's also what happens in the large intestine, the colon, where we get mostly water absorbed, as well as small nutrients. There's some digestion. The large intestine has a lot of bacteria in it, which we want. They're good bacteria. They are called commensals. They live in common with us, and they help us digest small food particles that are left over, and set free some vitamins that are really helpful. And so also they have even studies that some of their gases that are created go into the bloodstream of mice and make them happier and things like that. I mean, there's a lot of complications that we don't really understand. But because of those things, because of that, you know, the use of antibiotics can be a problem. If we overuse them, we get anti means against, bios means life. And so we kill all the bacteria in the gut, particularly to get rid of the ones that make us ill. But if we do that too much, especially if we do that in children, it really disrupts with the colon and can create problems later on in life. And so even though, yeah, we can eat fermented foods like kimchi or kombucha or, you know, kefir that are good, or we can take, you know, the probiotics as well to bring back good bacteria back into the gut. But we will lose different families. Some of those don't have the big array of families that or that are inside the native gut before we destroy it with antibiotics. So just be mindful a little bit of that before you just go ahead and everything can be cured with antibiotics. And at some point it's like, oops, do your research. Don't just listen to me, but be cautious when it comes to the hypermedication world that we are living in, I think. All right, and after the large intestine, we talk a little bit about the peritoneum. The peritoneum is a similar system like the serous membrane system in the lungs that holds the lungs to the chest wall. But in this instance, it helps to organize this complicated gut, all this wiggly stuff. And so that's what the peritoneum really does. It helps organize the stomach air, the gut, and it pulls it towards the back of the body wall. That's the peritoneum at large. And then we have the pancreas. We talked about it when we did the endocrine system. It's insulin and glucagon. Those are the hormones that are secreted by the pancreas, but the pancreas also secretes a ton of enzymes that basically digest all different food groups. I'm not going into all the different enzymes. You can look those up. There's lists and lists and lists. Whenever you see the word ASE or an ending of a word that ends in ASE, like amylase or lipase, then you know it's an enzyme. And the prefix of the word very often, like in lipase, for example, tells you, oh, it's probably going to digest lipids. And so, a lot can be learned by reading names and understanding prefixes and suffixes. I think, to me, that's one of the best help in anatomy physiology, to slow the studying down and don't just memorize, but try to understand what a word means. And then we can make a lot of sense out of it. And once it makes sense, it's much easier to memorize. I don't know if you noticed that. I've noticed that. Then we talk briefly about the liver. The liver is a gland. The liver is the largest gland in the body, and it basically does everything. So if you have a test and you don't understand an answer and liver is an answer, just pick the liver. It's most likely the best answer you can pick. At least that's what we were told. Once you do, I don't know, if you do nursing, you have to take state boards and stuff like that. And then the gallbladder is creating bile, and bile is an emulsification substance. It basically, what it does, it's like soap when you wash dishes. It disperses fat globules. Fat likes to aggregate and make bigger clumps. And what the bile does, it separates those out, makes small clumps out of it, or small little droplets that then the system can absorb. It basically is a you think of a match. There's a head on the match, and then the wooden part, the tail. And so the bile is a molecule, has molecules in it that have a positive, a negative, or a hydrophilic part end and a hydrophobic end, similar to the phospholipids that create the
cell membrane. Same as the cell membrane.
Similar, yeah, it's similar to the cell membrane, exactly. And what that does, it can disperse the fat and make little, have the hydrophobic tail go inward and hold on to the fat, and the hydrophilic part is on the outside, so it's okay in liquid. It's back to the oil and vinegar, where the salad dressing, you always have to shake it to disperse the fat molecules, and if before you pour it, it's back to that. And we just need the fat molecules to be small enough that we can actually digest them and absorb them. Otherwise, we don't absorb them. Somebody has the gallbladder out, they need to be careful with fat food, because it's going to upset the stomach, and you're not going to be able to absorb it as much. So if you don't have to get rid of an organ, try not to get rid of an organ. They might not tell you that when you go, well, if you have to get it out, you might not care, because it can be really painful if you have gallstones. And then from there, we just briefly have a discussion about the macronutrient digestion, the carbs, the fat, the carbs, and the proteins. And for the most part, you have the glucose, glycogen, you have the monosaccharides, the polysaccharides, and then you get the disaccharides, and from there you get monosaccharides. Once they're monosaccharides, you can digest them. And here we just talk about chemically that sucrose is a glucose, and the fructose. The fructose is actually what makes it taste sweet. the glucose, if you eat maltose as 2 glucoses, that's not that good tasting. But the glucose is what gives us the energy. So we're really concerned about how much glucose do we have to make good ATP. Anyway, but the fructose is what makes it sweet. And if we eat a lot of fructose, the fructose overtaxes the liver, and that can also give us liver problems like alcohol can. So if you drink, your 10, 12 Cokes a day, don't be alarmed that you have a fatty liver because of that, even if you don't drink alcohol. So that's where that is an interesting discussion. That's also where the high fructose corn syrup comes in, because a high fructose corn syrup has a 55% fructose and the 45% glucose range. So it's not intrinsically bad, as people sometimes say. It's just a little bit more fructose that makes it a little bit sweeter. It's extremely cheap. And so they put it into everything. And so that's where it becomes a problem. It's just that it is in everything that's sort of processed. If you actually read the ingredient list, it's interesting how you got a lot of high fructose corn syrup in things that aren't necessarily sweet. So if you read the bag, it's kind of interesting. Anyway, it'll make you go home and cook. The protein is basically a long chain of amino acids. And so we have proteins go with pepsin, that comes from the stomach, that digests the protein into large polypeptides, which is up to 50 amino acids, a chain. And then from there, we get into small peptides or short ones and amino acids. And once the amino acids are set free, we can absorb them into the bloodstream. And then in the body, they're going to be used to make protein again. The amino acids, that's, proteins are the building blocks for things that do things in the body, basically, molecules that do things in the body. So that's about that. All right, look at that. We're moving right along. Let's go to nutrition. In nutrition, I basically put sort of the main concepts up. That, if you want to really go into it and take a nutrition class, I think that's very cool stuff, but gets very complicated. And I taught it in costume because we had it on Halloween when we did it last time or a few times ago. But basically here I talk about, food to energy, how we, what is ATP again, that, food basically gives us energy. We talk a little bit about metabolism briefly. And then we go through the different macronutrients, the proteins, the fats, the carbs, what they are. We have a little discussion about sugar spikes, which is kind of interesting to talk about. I go more into that in the booklets and in the video. And then we also have a micronutrient section where we talk about vitamins and minerals. And I can never for the life of me remember which vitamin does, except for vitamin D and vitamin C. Mostly, but it's kind of, copy paste this list and sort of make sure you get enough of all of these vitamins. Water soluble vitamins are some that we should take a few times a day because we pee them right back out. You see that when you take a B complex vitamin, you get all the yellow. So that's sort of where you can see how fast it takes until it digests and processes it. The B vitamins. And then the fat soluble vitamins are not so very simple to take all the time because they are stored in fat. And so they don't just get peed out, they're staying in the body. There you must more theoretically worry about overdoing them, but if they come from food sources and not artificial substances, you're okay with not having too many of the fat soluble vitamins because the body can excrete them through the digestive process as well. Oh, and this is kind of cool because you see what food sources give you what kind of vitamins. So I kind of like this table that I copy paste. I didn't make that up. And then minerals are other things that we need. Minerals are, wait a minute, I always need to make sure. Minerals are used as co-vitamins or co-minerals, cofactors for enzyme function. And so they are very important that we have them and we have sufficient amounts of them. They are very small. We don't need much of them for most of them, but we do need them. And so the more processed our food is, the less we get. And also the soils over the years got depleted And so, organic is a little more helpful, but this is also where I think some multivitamins can be helpful, multivitamins / minerals can be helpful to take in. When I look at vitamins myself, I want to look at the ingredient list and say, like, it's cauliflower, it's Brussels sprouts, it's based on food things and not based on chemical things. So when I look at a vitamin product, even though they might be more expensive, I'm trying to look at natural ingredients and not synthetic artificial ingredients, because that very often doesn't really do that much in comparison. There's a story about, I think, Korean War people had a deficiency of a vitamin B somewhere, I think, and they tried to supplement it with some byproduct from the coal mining industry that seems to have that chemical in them, and they didn't do anything. And the local people told them just to eat rice bran more, which has a lot of that B complex in them, apparently. And, that helped versus the other one didn't help. Anyway, that's vitamins and minerals. What else we have here? Oh, and that's why I talk a little bit about the active plant substances. It's good to eat foods that grow and are colored, because even though we have micronutrients extracted and figured out which ones have what in them, we have not understood them at all. For example, a tomato has over 10,000 different active substances in it, but we only have studied a few of them. And so it's always good to eat the food that comes from the ground, and not, the highly processed white bread that we can buy that you... When I first came to America, man, I couldn't understand these breads. You squeeze them together and there's like an inch thick for a whole bread. But anyway, that's my European judgment on those things. And then the other thing that's extremely important is fiber. And I think if you want to increase on one thing, if you don't poop enough, or you have issues with weight or issues with blood sugar regulation, I think one of the best things you can do, besides, of course, always more activity, but is increase your fiber in your food. And even if that means you eat fiber pills, I don't care about that. But the more fiber we have, the less fast the food gets processed and the fiber absorbs sugars and so forth and balances everything out. So fiber is extremely important in our diet. So there's just a little bit of a blurb there and a little bit more on the video. Cool. Moving right along. Going to the next topic. The peeing stuff. The urinary system. So in the body, when we end up having to get rid of a lot of stuff. And so we talked about the lungs, we can get rid of the gas stuff like carbon dioxide. In the kidneys, we can filter the blood and get rid of liquid stuff. And then in the digestive tract, we can, get rid of all the solid stuff and get it out of the system. So we make sure that those elimination systems work, because otherwise the body becomes more toxic, and we don't want that. So the main job of the kidneys is to eliminate metabolic products like proteins, like uric acid, for example, and also toxic substances like medication. When you look at medication, you always want to be aware that medication will tax either your kidneys or your liver somewhat. So not that that's a bad thing, but that's what has to process it. And if we overdo that too much, if we drink too much alcohol, we're going to have a problem with the liver. If we take too many medications over a lifetime, we're going to have a problem with the liver or the kidneys. And we just want to be aware of that. Also, the kidneys are very important to maintain an electrolyte balance, an electrolyte concentration, acid-base balance, as well as osmotic pressure. And that's largely to do because in the kidneys, we get rid of ions and substances, but we also determine how much liquid is in our system. And we pee more, we pee less. You can and we get rid of more of the liquids and then have less in the body. And that can decrease blood pressure, for example, or we maintain more liquid. Like if we have a high sodium diet, the reason why we maintain more liquid with that and why sodium raises blood pressure or can is because the water will follow the salt. The more salt we have in the system, the more water will be retained inside the system. And that, of course, is more volume, and that will put more volume through the blood vessels, and that put more pressure onto the blood vessels. It's like you let the hose go on a water with a lot of water going through it. It'll put more pressure onto the hose, or compared to it just being a dribble. And that's right there, also the blood pressure. And also the kidneys control the blood forming elements through, especially the red blood cells, through erythropoietin. So it has controlling mechanism, because a lot of the liquid gets filtered through the kidneys, and it can also get monitored then through the kidneys of what's in the blood and what do we need to replace. And so that's why we have a lot of those mechanisms in there.
Professor,
Yes, sir.
it is pretty obvious that we need to drink as much water as possible, but why did I recently read, I can't tell you where, that actually there is such thing as drinking too much water? Did that make sense?
Yeah, but I think it also has to do how fast the water is drunk.
Oh,
Like, because it can overtax the kidneys, and it can be a question of speed. How fast can the liquid be processed? When they do, like, water drinking contents, and people drink like a gallon in an hour or something, so you want to be, I think there is a balance. And so I know they talk about, there's actually a book called You're Not Sick, You're Just Thirsty, that was written by a guy who, in the late 70s, when the Iranian crisis happened, and all the intellectuals in Iran were held hostage, and they got sick. And this one guy was asked, what can we do about peptic ulcers and so forth, and stress-related disease? And he basically proved at that point that if you increase your water, you can get rid of a lot of pathologies. And from there, I think we learned a lot. And the latest that I sort of read is you drink your body weight in pounds, not in kilograms. Half of your body weight in ounces. That's about how much you should drink a day. But I kind of go with the 2 to 3 liters a day that I like to drink. The problem is drinking when we're thirsty is not good enough, because that's an adaptable feeling. And so people can not feel thirsty, but then don't drink all day, or have coffee or alcohol, which gets rid of more of the liquid, then replenishing it. Because when you drink alcohol, you have or coffee, you have an anti-diuretic hormone that gets not secreted, gets inhibited. And anti-diuretic means not peeing, anti-peeing hormone. And so then that hormone is not there, which keeps liquid into the system. And that's then all the liquid that comes through the kidneys, or much more of it, gets peed out. And that's why if you drink a lot of coffee, you're going to have to pee a lot, for example, or same with alcohol. And so also that's why, like in Italy, I remember you get an espresso and you get a glass of water with it to replenish that. And so I think a lot of, where was I going with that? I think, drinking a lot of water is important, but I also feel like don't overdo it. So I measure myself between 2 and 3 liters, 2 and 3 quarts a day. And of course, if it's hot outside and you have thirst and you want more, then that's different, because you're sweating a lot. But yeah, don't think drinking gallons and gallons of water and your stomach hurts from it is going to be healthy. That's probably too much. All right, when we go here, we go for the blood flow through the kidneys. So when we look at the kidneys at large, you have this 2 kidneys, and they're structured that they have an inside, a medulla, and an outside, a cortex. And when you break it down, you have blood going in, and ultimately you reach these small little organs that filter the blood. So the blood comes in, gets basically squeezed out through this filtering system. And these tubules here is where then the blood gets, most of the blood that has been filtered, and now it's called a filtrate, goes back into the bloodstream and gets reabsorbed. And then some of the stuff that's left over goes down a long tube goes down into these funnels and then goes down the ureter into the bladder, and then we pee it out. So when it goes down in here, then there is no more back and forth happening. Most back and forth happens in this long wiggly tube.
That's urea in that big tube.
No, urea is a protein that gets secreted from the bloodstream directly, and then gets peed out as well. But because you have some substances that get squeezed out, but it's a filtering system. So if the substances are larger, then passing through the filter, you're going to keep it in the bloodstream, but then those substances can be actively secreted from the bloodstream into the tubules, and then we pee that out. And urea is one of those examples. And basically, the rest here is just talking about the filtering system. And this has a lot to do, like this long thing going down and coming back up, has a lot to do with how much sodium is in this area here, and how much water gets brought from the tubules back into the space, and then goes into the blood vessel. And so that's quite a complicated thing. We're just kind of touching on it a little bit. And then if you go to Bio 2, or more like Bio 4, you're really going into detail how this works, this system of because water can be moved passively from the filtrate. It gets filtered from the blood to the filtrate, to the tubules, but then bringing it back from the filtrate, from the tubules into the bloodstream, that's a passive process that happens with water follows salt, water follows ions. And so the sodium is actively transported into this space, and then the water just follows it and gets, reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. All right. I'm running a little ahead with my voice. I had to drink a lot of coffee this morning to be awake to work on this stuff. And then this renin-angiotensin-aldosterone mechanism is basically how we can determine the blood pressure and how we can regulate the blood pressure. So the blood pressure is measured in an area that is right by this filtrate, right by this glomerulus, which is where we filter the blood through into the tubules, and we can measure the blood pressure there. And then from there we have a renin secretion, and the renin has multiple steps that goes then into aldosterone, and aldosterone works on the sodium, and the sodium then determines how much blood gets reabsorbed in the blood, and then that ultimately decides what is the blood pressure doing, if the blood pressure goes up or down. So that's an interesting little mechanism, multi-step mechanism that we have in our body to regulate blood pressure. And the aquaporins here is aquaporins means water channels, and some of those are the ones that are regulated by the antidiuretic hormone, the ADH, and that's the one that I told you is influenced by alcohol and caffeine consumption, which is where we can sort of see it, the ADH here, and that works on the aquaporins. And if you have ADH present, then those are closed. So those open. So so we don't pee out all the water. So the water goes back into the bloodstream. When we have alcohol or caffeine present, then the ADH is not secreted, and then those channels stay closed, and so the liquid stays in the tubules and we pee out more. So that's that one. And then from there, we just briefly talk about the urinary rest of the urinary tract. But that's basically tubes, and then the bladder is a bag with some muscles, and then from the ureter, the bladder, we go into the urethra, and that basically helps us, is another tube that helps us pee. We have a sphincter there. That's why when you're born, you cannot control your pee mechanism, but when we get trained, we can control that more or less, and we can regulate when do we want to pee and when not. And the bladder is a holding tank that we have. Essentially a muscular holding tank. I make it sound like it's not important. It's definitely important. All right, and from there then we're gonna finish up the chapter with the repro system. We always start with the guys first. Of course we do, right? But what is the reason for the reproductive system, medically speaking, is making germ cells and promoting the union of the sperm and the egg, and then creating, you know, an embryo that can grow enough into a viable fetus that can be born and survive in the outside world, and all the stuff we need to do that. And so we have in the male reproductive system, we have the external genitalia, and then we have which is the penis and the testes, and the testes create the sperm and make the sperm be viable, meaning it can swim up through these channels. And then when we have a union, we're gonna have the penis, where it's basically a long structure that can penetrate and can deliver the sperm into the vagina of the woman. And so the rest here talks mostly about how the sperm is made and how it learns how to swim in the epididymis. And then sperm are really good swimmers. If you actually have sperms be as big as humans, forget Michael Phelps. They can swim much better. And the other thing we need to talk about, of course, then here are sperm and egg are not diploid cells, they're haploid cells. They don't have two sets of the DNA material, they only have one set of the DNA material. And so instead of mitosis, you're going to have a process called meiosis. And we talk a little bit about how we first have a basic cell, the spermatogonium, which is always there, which is sort of the stem part of the cell, and that creates a mitosis. And then we create a primary spermatocyte, and from there, that's still a 2 number. That 2n means it has 2 genetic materials in it. But then from there, we don't replicate the genome, we just split the cell, and then that becomes then cells that only have 1 number of the genetic material in them, and then that ultimately becomes the sperm. We can multiply that again and split that, and then it becomes a sperm.
Spermatozoids have only 23 chromosomes?
Yes.
So, and randomly, 2 spermatozoids have a different set of 23 instead of 46? Or are they all the same?
No,
are they all twins?
No, it's the same. It's generally the same, but there is some interchangeability with them. And that happens. I'm not sure if it happens in meiosis 1 or in meiosis 2, where some of them interchange, and that creates the variety.
Wow.
Yeah, that gets a little bit more complicated too, that we're, you know, not covering in this introduction set of things. You can more in bio 2. I'm not sure how much in bio 2, but definitely in bio 4. Or in 20AB, which is the combination. You know, in Merit or at Peralta, we have the introduction class, the 24, and then we get in the bio 20A and B, which is a whole year, which we get much more into those discussions. Or we can do a full semester of anatomy, which is bio 2, and then afterwards a full semester of physiology, which is bio 4, which is sort of the highest level of what we teach at Merit, which gets pretty involved. I've taught bio 4 a couple of times. It's very complicated. I'm more the anatomy guy when it comes to muscles and bones particularly. So that's the same for the guys and the ladies. The meiosis is not making sperm, obviously. And then we have a little discussion about the male sex hormone, the testosterone, where it is created and what does it do. And it promotes the sperm production, of course, we know that, but also it promotes, of course, the sex hormone promotes sex organ creation, and also the difference between women and men, how the guys look, the main specific behavior, but also that we have, you know, the guys have more bone and stronger bones and muscle systems and so forth, and also works on the hair distribution and et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of interesting a little. Spermatozoa, we talk a little bit about the sperm. It has a front part which has enzymes in it, the acrosome, which help penetrate the ovum. And then we have the nucleus, which is where the genetic material is, and everything else is related to swimming. So we got a lot of mitochondria in here. We got also a lot of sugary stuff in here. And then we have a long tail of flagellum that, wiggles and the sperm can swim. Essentially that. And then we have to talk about, we have some secretions. We have multiple, we have seminal vesicles that make an alkaline-rich secretion. That is, when we look at semen, it's sperm and the secretions together. And so the alkaline is very important for the sperm to be viable, especially if it gets into the vagina, because the vagina is more acidic. And so it has to be protected. Also, the seminal vesicle has a lot of fructose in it, and that gives the sperm energy to move forward and keep them viable as they go through the tract to hopefully, one of them fertilize an ovum. Then we have the prostate gland, and that is slightly acidic, and that has enzymes as well and antibodies that help the motility of the sperm and the fertility. That prostate is also the gland that is, let me show you where it's at. Where are we at? Probably here, yeah. The prostate is right here, and the seminal vesicles, where are the seminal vesicles? I'm a little scattered over here. They're in the beginning. I don't see them right here.
Women have prostates as well, correct?
No, they don't.
Wow.
No. Well, that, we are the ones who get prostate problems. The prostate is the gland that also gets a lot of, it enlarges as we get older, and it also can create, cancer. And it's one of the cancers that the guys get.
Prostaglandin is involved into birth too, no?
Huh? Prostaglandins? Yeah, there is some involvement in the birth process with prostaglandins, but
there's injection of prostaglandins for when you want to induce birth, correct?
yes, it helps with the stimulation of the uterus. And see, we also have that we need that as well if we want to get the sperm go through the uterus and swim up the fallopian tube into fertilizing an egg. We also need the prostaglandins to stimulate the uterus, and then we can also use that to stimulate the birthing process. But then that's injected, of course. And then we also got the Cowper's gland, the bulbourethral gland, and that's another helpful alkaline fluid that helps neutralize the acidity of the vagina. An average ejaculate is about 20 million sperms per milliliter, so that's really a lot of sperms. But we basically need, you can see how many of them we need to have one make it. It's a really torturous task. It's like climbing Mount Everest, basically. And then we have the secretions, we have the external organs, we have the penis, and we have the testes. We'll talk has a little bit of a conversation about that, how we have multiple, the penis is not a muscle, it's basically engorged, tissue engorged with blood. And we have two cavernosa. These are two bodies that fill with blood when the penis becomes erect. And then we also have a corpus spongiosum, and that's around the urethra, and that helps us with peeing. That's the urethra, where the urine goes through. That needs to stay open. Well, not just the pee go through. The urine, it also is where the semen goes through before it gets ejaculated. So the spongiosum needs to be patent and open, but the cavernosum needs to be hardened and engorged with blood. So we need to separate those two areas to make sure the semen doesn't get stuck. And the reason why the testes, which actually start up in the stomach area, and then they descend at some point when the fetus in the embryonic stages of fetal development, and they need to be outside of the body wall, because in order to make sperm, the body temperature is too warm for that, and that's why they descend and come and live outside of the body. that's that. And then we have a brief discussion about the ejaculation, how it's a combination between sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. And from there, we go to the female reproductive system. And basically, the female reproductive system, of course, is more complicated because we need to not just make the ovum and deliver an ovum somewhere. No, we need to make the ovum and make it viable. And then we need to have the baby be born or grow and be able to then be born. And so we have multiple organs that need to do that. Let's see here. So we have the ovaries on, where is the development? No, let's just look at that. I don't have a cross section. Oh, here's the cross section. So when we have the bladder here, and behind the bladder we have the uterus. And this is if it's not pregnant, it's about a pear-shaped kind of organ. It's not that large. You can see here, it's not that large. And then we have tubes coming up on the side. These are fallopian tubes or uterine tubes. And the fallopian tubes open up with fimbria, the finger-like extensions that move towards an ovary. And we have two ovaries, one on each side. And the ovaries are what makes the egg viable. So the ovaries, all the eggs are created in a first stage. When you look at the development of the eggs, before birth, we have this first mitosis, and then we have a stop, and the egg is the eggs are all made, but they're not finished made. They're stuck in the first meiotic division. And then from there, after birth, each month, we have one of the eggs develop into a mature ovum, where we have a division without having a genetic material copying. And that's over here. One of them then becomes an ovum, and the other one becomes a polar body, which helps nurture and nourish the ovum until it's mature enough that it can be, what is it called? That a sperm can fertilize it. So let's go back to this. And so that all happens, where was that? In the ovary. And you can see that these are the immature ovum. I don't know what the term is for multiple for ovum, the plural. And then as we get here, one of them develops into a mature ovum, and then it gets ejected from the ovary, which we know as the Mittelschmerz. That's opposite in between the two menstruals, the menstrual cycle. That's a little bit of a pain that the woman feels, and that's when the ovum gets secreted and leaves the ovary, and the fimbria then, these finger-like extensions, move and pick it up and bring it into the fallopian tube. And the fallopian tube, it carries it downward into the uterus. And if the egg is fertilized, then obviously we create a pregnancy there, if everything goes well.
When the ovum is ejected from the ovary, is that when the bleeding happens?
No, the bleeding happens when you look at the menstrual. So the bleeding happens when you look throughout the menstrual cycle. This is the tissue lining of the uterus. And so we have an increase of tissue lining to make an ovum if it's viable, or if it's fertilized and viable, that it can embed and implant. And then after that process is finished, we have here progesterone and estrogen. The progesterone goes up and that lining fluffs off, and that's the bleeding. That's the menstruation. And then it starts the process again. The estrogen goes up, and that creates more of the uterine lining, become thicker and become more engorged with blood. So the ovum that is fertilized has a nice place to embed. But when that doesn't happen, then the progesterone makes this extra lining, fluff off, and that's the menstruation process, and that's the bleeding. The Mittelschmerz is in between. The ovulation, the Mittelschmerz is a little bit before the ovulation happens, when the ovum gets secreted out of the ovary. We did ovary, we did development a little, we did ovulation. That's the Mittelschmerz. Okay, that's good. We don't need to go worse than that. We have a little, oh, look, this is a better picture actually. That we have a little bit a better picture of the fallopian tube, because this is this long tube. Well, it's long for an egg to go down. And I don't know, it takes a few days to travel down. But what's interesting is the ovary is detached from the fallopian tube. So that's why you can have an ectopic pregnancy, for example, because if the ovum doesn't make it into the fallopian tube, but it still gets fertilized, then it can start embedding somewhere outside of the uterus. And that's, a problem. We have to terminate those pregnancies because that can be very dangerous. Plus, it's not going to be a viable fetus. And that's one of those discussions about Roe versus Wade, because these politicians don't even understand the medical parts of it. And, anyway, they don't even want to terminate a pregnancy if it's an ectopic pregnancy if they're really religious. And so we need to be able to talk about those things in an educated fashion, not just a political fashion.
So the fecundation, the moment where the sperm meets the ovule and gets in and there's a fecundation, it happens in the uterus or in the fallopian tube?
No, it happens in the fallopian tube.
Oh.
Yeah,
And then
along
the
here.
fecundated egg goes down the uterus.
Yeah, well, the egg goes down anyway. If it's just not fertilized, it's not going to embed.
Oh.
And then it's just going to get, it's the menstruation, it's just going to leave the body. And then we have a little bit of a talk about the, this is small font. I need to change that font. What is that? Uterus. The uterus is a pear-shaped organ that is, supporting the fertilized ovum. And it has a few structures. It has a top structure that's known as the fundus, and we talk about more of that, where the fallopian tubes come in, and then the main area where we can ideally embed the fetus. And then at the bottom, it has a cervix, and the cervix is closed until, the baby is ready to come out. And then the cervix opens, and that's where they measure it. How far along are you in your delivery is how open that the cervix is, because if the cervix is closed, there is no point for the fetus to be able to come out yet. It's not ready yet. It can't go through it. The inner lining of the mucosa here, that's that lining that thickens in the cycle, and with the menstruation it gets fluffed off, and then it becomes thinner again. And so the thickness of the mucosa is depending on the phase in the cycle, is between 2 and 8 millimeters thick. And so there's a fairly large variability there, depending on where we are along the cycle.
Is the cervix a muscle?
That's a good question.
Is it a sphincter
It's a sphincter, but it's not a muscle it's not a muscle, but I don't know what tissue it is made. It's more passive tissue than muscular tissue. But it must have collagen fibers in it for sure, and it's stretchable. So I would think it's got elastic parts to it for sure. Elastic fibers that are stretchable, but I don't think it's a muscle. But I can research that a little bit more. It's been a long time since I made those.
Cool.
I know. I'm not that versed with those chapters, and it's been a long time. Then underneath the uterus, we got the vagina, and the vagina is a thin-walled tube that is a weak muscle layer that is sort of goes into the birth canal. Then it's fairly acidic. That's important to keep all the bad stuff out that we don't want in there. And then the vulva is essentially the part of the vagina, but it's the entry part, and then it also has a little bit of a penis in there, kind of thing. It's the clitoris, and that's sort of a small little penis that the woman also has, and that's interesting when we talk about transgender sometimes, because depending, medically speaking, if a person is born and has just a small penis, they actually decided medically if it's a girl or a boy. And so that's where there is a little bit of variability going on that the trans community sometimes talks about, that we do need to take very seriously, I believe. And then lastly, we just talked briefly about the breast tissue, and the breast tissue is the milk production. So that's what gives the newborn food to, survive. And also the other thing that we get through the milk are antibodies and other substances that the baby needs to survive. And so especially the antibodies is a good argument why we shouldn't do why we should do breastfeeding versus artificial feeding, because that is depending on where the woman lives and what the mom is exposed to. And then those antibodies are produced into the milk for the baby to be helped with a passive immunity, obviously, but until the baby is strong enough to create its own active immunity. And so that's I think one of the many reasons why, if we can breastfeed, it would be a good idea to breastfeed. That's just my opinion, of course. But the videos will go a little bit more into detail on that. Unfortunately, I don't have class videos on those. I only have the lecture videos because we never get to those chapters in the classroom. We're always sort of running a little bit behind. And the last chapter that we got is the embryology. It talks first about the fertilization, how the sperm penetrates the outside of the egg, the ovum, and then one of them gets through. And once that one of them gets through, there's a reaction, and none of the other ones can get through. At least most of the time. Sometimes we, of course, have paternal twins. They're called paternal twins, right? When two eggs, two sperm penetrate one egg. Sometimes we have two eggs that get in maternal twins that get penetrated, and that's not the same. There's still then one sperm penetrating each ovum.
If two gets in, there's two. How come there's two things to react with inside the ovum?
I don't know that.
There should be. It sounds to me like there's one.
Yeah. But somehow that works.
Yep, oh, that's weird.
more research to be done. Yeah, why is the maternal twins or paternal twins?
The paternal are identical, where if it's two eggs and two sperms, they're not identical, right?
Right. They're just housing two different babies, basically. But why is the paternal twin a possibility? Where along the line can we make two out of the ovum only having one set of DNA?
It's 2 out of 3 and not 2 out of 4, right?
Right, exactly. That is a very good question. When we look at the embryonic development, that becomes very complicated language because it changes all the time. And I try to do the best possible sort of overview I could with all the language in here. But what's interesting, when we develop, at some point, we create 3 layers of tissue, of cells. And each of these 3 layers, we can then deduce what they become. And so we have an ectoderm or an ectodermal layer that becomes the skin part, but also the nervous system part. So that's interesting. That's where we have the new relation that we talked about in the brain briefly. And then we got a mesodermal layer, and that becomes the skeletal system, muscular system, also the circular system in the lungs. And then the endodermal layer becomes the digestive system, and basically everything else. So we got an outer layer, even though the outer layer doesn't just do the skin, it also does the nervous system. A middle layer that basically, for the most part, is muscle, bones, and circulation, as well as the lungs. And then the endoderm is the gut, the liver, pancreas, and a little bit also part of the lungs as well.
So the ectoderm, when you say 1 hair, 2 nails, 3 skin, 4 nervous system, that includes brain?
Nervous system includes brain.
Yeah, okay. Wow.
Yeah, see, that's where we have that's what I find interesting, because I'm doing the nervous system stuff. But we have the ectoderm goes inside, invaginates, and then becomes the neural tube. And then the neural tube becomes the spinal cord. And the brain is basically a blown up neural tube that over time, becomes bigger and has different functions, of course. But they're all connected. And so that's how the ectoderm becomes the nervous system. So that's pretty interesting stuff, I think.
Crazy.
complicated. Then the other thing we get in the, we have the fetus that's developing, but we also have the placenta that's developing. The most important part of the placenta is the fact that the fetus is fed by maternal blood, and the placenta is attached to the uterus and sort of filters the blood and creates blood that can then be given to the fetus. And so it's the support structure. But when we're born, we will have also an afterbirth, and that's the placenta, that's the afterbirth. And we need to make sure the placenta, doesn't rip away the maternal tissue too much and separates, because that can create excessive bleeding and that can be a danger to the woman. And so that's important from that part as well.
At that point, mother and fetus do have two different blood supply, correct?
At the birth?
No. Yeah, at birth for sure. But right there, if you scroll down a bit,
Yeah.
the blood, the baby's blood or the fetus blood and the mother's blood are two different things, right? They're not.
Right.
It's not the same.
Right.
It's not like a direct.
Right, and the
Right.
placenta is that is where the fetal blood gets the nutrients from the maternal blood.
It's like a stomach thing. I mean, I get. I don't know. No,
Well,
moving on.
no, it's simply just it's not a stomach thing. It's simply just blood vessels that go, from the fetus that go close to the maternal blood, and then the blood crosses the nutrients from the blood crosses over, whatever the fetus needs.
Huh.
But that's why you can have a fetus that's Rh negative and the mom that's Rh positive, or the other way around. And it becomes a problem at some point once the mom's blood is primed. That's where that interplay comes in. And then we get the birthing process, and the birthing process have multiple stages. The first stage is the dilation stage, where we look at the cervix, how much is the cervix dilating, which is in 10 centimeters, which seems to be pretty small, but it's big enough. And then we have the birth itself, where most ideally we don't have a breech, which means we have, when we don't have a breech birth, we have the head first. And so the head comes out, and then it has to turn, and then the shoulders squeeze one shoulder at a time through. And then basically once that happens, the baby comes out pretty easily at that point. And then thirdly, in breech, we most likely have to have a C-section, which there is some methods that can turn the baby. Breech means the head is not on the bottom, the butt is at the bottom, or it's any other part is at the bottom. And that's a problem for a vaginal birth. And we have to, if the baby's breech, they're sometimes trying to change the baby's position, but medically speaking, they go from the outside and they're trying to push on the stomach and turn the baby, and that's pretty violent. In what we found in my profession in chiropractic, what's interesting, there's studies that show that if the pelvis is level and everything is working well with down there, then the baby turns most of the time on its own. But if that doesn't happen, then you want to have a C-section because it's a very difficult birth and it's very dangerous for the baby. And then lastly, stage 3 of the birth is the afterbirth, which is called afterbirth because it's the placenta gets detached and leaves and is basically exiting through the vagina, the body. And that's called stage 3. So it's a very important part. Again, we don't want to discount the placenta because it can put the mom at risk. Also because it's a foreign body, as you mentioned before, right? It's baby blood in there, and the mom's body at that point figures it's a foreign body and it will fight it. And that is not what we want, because that creates a reaction and, sort of an infectious reaction type thing. And then lastly, in the booklet, there's some pictures, but postnatally, we have different stages of development. The first month is right after birth. It's called the neonatal period. Then we have infancy to 2. And then we get the toddler. That's in childhood. Well, actually, childhood is just as a whole from the terrible 2s to the terrible 3s or the terrible puberties. And then puberty is about 12-ish. I think that's number is decreasing as time goes on. That's when the body when we get also the sex stuff starts happening in puberty. And after that, after the mid-teens, we call it youth. And then adolescence is about mid-20s on. I mean, youth and adolescence is to about the mid-20s when we're fully developed. The brain develops, quite late ultimately. And so we're talking about the brain development is not really done until the mid-20s. What's interesting is the body grows rapidly. Obviously, in the first 2 years, we reach about 50% of the body growth. But we also first have sort of the head growing, and then the body comes with it afterwards. So when you look at a structure at a picture, and I don't have a picture right next to me of it in the booklet, there is one that shows it, that the head grows first really heavily, and then afterwards the body kind of follows. Anyway, and that's about it. All right, any questions? Good, if no questions, then let's just make sure we get everything done in terms of the work. So what I need from you guys finished up by the 22nd, which is when the semester finishes, and then at that point Canvas closes. So you need to make sure everything is in, all the questions need to be in, all the labeling and coloring exercise need to be uploaded, and the final exam, test 3, needs to be done by the, why does it say here 21st? Should say, thought it was the 22nd, hold on. Yeah, 22nd, until 22nd. Oh, so it's due on the 25th. I can change that. I can change that real quick right now. There we go. Let's see if it takes it. Hopefully it takes it. And what's today? The 11th. So let's just open that. That way you guys can take it whenever you want if you're working ahead of the game. But if you are running behind, although it's not really much of a help, but I can give you an extension on the labeling exercises till Saturday night or early Sunday morning, and then Sunday night I have to do the grading to get in, but the questions will close. So once the 22nd hits, the Canvas is closed for you guys. I don't know, I don't have an ability to change that, because some people ask me to, keep the lectures up so you can go back or go back to the bullet points. But if you want anything from the bullet points, make sure you copy paste it or screenshot it and paste it into a Word document or so you have your own document if you don't have the booklets. But other than that, the 22nd, everything is finished and you cannot access this anymore. So I want to make sure, even though I tell people you can have extensions, that's no problem. But it is a problem once the class is finished. So make sure you don't go overboard over that date. Once you finish the class and you wonder what your grade is, you can reach out to me and I can pretty much right after the 22nd or maybe Saturday, compound it and then tell you what it is if you don't want to wait till the grade comes in Peralta. Okay. Oh, last thing, make sure if you like the class to go to Rate My Professor and give me a little review. The more there is there, the more people can find the class and the more people can, take it. And because I hope it wasn't too boring of a class, even though it's going very fast and you're just sort of scratching the surface, or we're just sort of scratching the surface of anatomy and physiology, but it should be sort of an interesting study because it's ultimately about our own body. And unfortunately, a lot of the times it's taught quite dry and as a scientific sort of thing. And I just don't personally think it should be that. And it should be more fun and more interesting. And I'm trying to make it as such. And the more people know about that, the more people can take it and not be afraid of it. I was originally afraid of anatomy because all the terminology, but I got over it more or less. Any final thoughts or any comments that you guys have?
It's pretty clear to me.
Good. All right. Well, if everybody's good, then I wish you guys a wonderful finishing of the semester. and hopefully a little bit of a break before the fall starts, and enjoy yourself and don't work too hard.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Ram.
Have a good one and be in touch, okay? Even after semester, just reach out if you have questions or comments or want to talk to me, chiropractic, massage stuff, or so forth. I'm good about that.
Thank you,
Definitely.
sir. Take care.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.